Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name is Dan Lizette, and this is episode 69, and I'm very happy that each of you came back and joined me again for another great interview. I know that a lot of you have been telling me I've been adding to your subscription list over these last several weeks, and of course, that's my goal here on the Podcast Digest, tell you guys about great things to listen to. Now, I know from hearing from a lot of you on Twitter and social media and people who have submitted to my Recommend Yourself a podcast that I should be listening to, that there's a lot of podcasters listening. And I've talked directly to you guys before, and I try to send out, especially here lately, a lot of deals on gear and things of that nature. So I wanted to come up with another guest that I thought you podcasters who are listening would really enjoy. Now, I really think everybody listening right now is going to be able to get something from the gentleman I've asked to join me today. But it's been since episode 31 back in March of this year since I really kind of crafted an episode directly to you podcasters. That was Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. I definitely recommend you guys go back and listen to that one if for some reason you joined me late or hadn't heard it. But my guest this week, here on episode 69 in December of 2015, is the one, the only, the real Brian from Profitcast. Now, Profitcast is a show I've been listening to almost since its inception, and it's been a very unique show that I refuse to remove from my subscription list, even though I've done that to many. And we're going to talk a little bit about why that is. So, Brian, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. It's good to be here, man.
Well, it's great to have you. It's great to talk to you, and I know that we've also both mutually appeared on, let's see here, Podcast Junkies with Harry Duran,
yes.
And we've both talked with Dave in the past, so it's really great to finally talk to you.
Yeah, I know. Well, and we've been, keeping in touch over Twitter a little bit and, stuff over the last, year and a half now almost?
Yeah.
It's been a long time already.
It's been a fun ride, though.
It flew.
So folks who don't have any idea who you are, Brian, or what Profitcast is, give people just a little bit of background before we dive into it.
Sure. Well, to start with, Profitcast is a show basically about the journey of what it takes to profit with a podcast. It started off as the idea of how do you make money with a podcast and grow your audience? And it kind of morphed into, profiting is beyond the money too. It's about impacting somebody, making a difference, changing the world, whatever it is, that you want to do. And so it's been a very fascinating journey, but that's what it's about. I've interviewed a lot of podcasters who have succeeded in certain areas to find out how they've profited and, to be able to share what kind of tips they've had that have worked for them. And then I've shared my journey too, which has been a fascinating one. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure. There's been my success moments and my I think I'm going to shut this stupid podcast down moments. Yeah. Which, you've heard those.
Absolutely.
Like, stop. You're not shutting it down.
That is on my bullets of things I want to talk about. That particular episode of Profitcast. We'll come back to that.
Okay,
but
sounds
folks,
good.
Just to kind of back up what I was saying in terms of how long I've been listening to Brian and Profitcast, those of you know... friends of the show, Neil and Annalise from Dark Angels and Pretty Freaks, I recommended them back on September 25th, 2014. That was episode 5 of the Podcast Digest. The other show I recommended, this was back when I was doing a solo show, was Profitcast. The name of that episode was Profit Angels. It was Dark Angels and Pretty Freaks and Profitcast. And so that's how long I've been listening to Brian and how much I've thoroughly enjoyed his show since way back in September of 2014. So that's why I say it's such a thrill to finally get a chance to talk to you, Brian, because I've been listening for a very long time.
I appreciate that.
So let's talk a little bit about, let's go way back in time before we get to a lot of the craziness of that kind of last 15 months story that we'll be talking about. But tell folks a little bit about your background, your history. I know you have a radio background, and tell folks where this voice comes from.
Oh, gosh. Keeping this concise is the hard part. I have had a passion for getting behind the microphone since I was young. And in, I think it was middle school, maybe. I want to say middle school, somewhere in there. I did a bunch of research on Orson Welles. If you're familiar with him, he was the guy responsible for War of the Worlds, one of the original radio broadcasts, from the 1930s. He was the voice of the Shadow. Yes, that's partially where I got my superhero name for Aero Squad. So stuff like that. And I researched him. I researched Wolfman Jack. I was a huge fan of radio broadcasts, and I wanted to be a radio DJ. That was my big thing. I wanted to share music with people, wanted to be famous, all that good stuff when you're young. And so I did some shadowing of radio. I got into radio when I was in high school. I did it kind of as a starting, our radio station in high school as, just to see what would happen. It actually went very well. turned into a class credit, a letter, a TV station, so on and so forth. It really ended up becoming something very cool after I left. I did college radio. I did corporate radio for a while, online radio. I mean, that's just kind of the basics. I did this on and off throughout the years, but getting behind the microphone was a huge passion. The problem was, as I had graduated college and was starting to get into radio was starting to decline. It was going away from its glory days into the whole read this script and don't deviate. You don't get to choose your own music anymore. It's pre-programmed and we'll know if you change anything. Stuff like that. Like the joy of radio was being taken away. And actually towards the last days of my radio experience, they were starting to fire people and just hire people out of like big cities and then syndicate the shows nationally, so they didn't have to pay the money. So it was a very disappointing end for me because radio was such a huge dream. But then I had been hearing about this whole thing called podcasting and thought, hey, this is the same thing. It's just a different technology. It's an opportunity for us to do our own thing, though, without the corporate influence, which I liked. And so I had to learn how to do a talk show because I relied on the crutch of, I have nothing to say, so here's a song.
Right.
So I had to do that. And I thankfully was able to learn how to do all that through some of the online radio days. I was terrible at it in the beginning, just fumbled my way through it, had a few listeners that were forgiving and kind of grew my way into radio, from radio into podcasting. Started off with a podcast called Organized Chaos, which was it was a morning show idea that we threw into that, and it's gone, and kind of got rid of that. And then I did another podcast where I would interview rappers, which I love interviewing people. Let me just say this right now, because I know there's a lot of interview podcasts, but I started off interviewing people in radio. I love it. Love interviewing celebrities, musicians, actors, whatever. It's a passion. And so I did that for years. And then kind of got into this whole idea of I don't know what I'm going to do with podcasting, but I want to make some money so that I don't have to, I'd like to make money doing this because I was making money on radio and I wanted to do this. And so actually how this got started into the monetization side of things was that there was a company called TV Talk that started, and they were hiring podcaster hosts and producers, and they were paying very well. And I got in and I said, I want to do Arrow. I love this show. It had been the first season. It was going into the second season of Arrow. I wanted to do a podcast about Arrow. Got assigned it. I did Big Bang Theory as well. And then I was able to be a producer as well. And I made a full-time living doing this for a year. And I thought, dude, I get paid to talk about TV shows and edit other people. This is awesome. And I'm like, it's too good to be true, though. Like, I just kept feeling that the whole time. And not a year later, didn't go the way that the guy that started it had intended. And so he shut it down. Unfortunately, I was losing money, which I understand. It's one of those ventures. He took a risk on it, didn't pay off. But at that point, I thought, well, if I can get paid to do this, I'm going to find another way to make money doing podcasting. We kept TV Talk Arrow. We rebranded it Arrow Squad. We're still doing that today. There's some incredible stuff that's happened since then as a result, and I'll share that later. But then it was the premise of I've got to figure out a way to make money doing podcasting because this is what I want to do, and this is my passion, and this is what I'm good at. So that's where I started Profitcast.
So, but before we get to Profitcast, I want to go one more time way back to little tiny Brian with the idea of wanting to be in radio. How old were you when you first got this idea in your head, do you think?
Well, I think it was either, I want to say it was like early middle school, somewhere in there. So, in the 5th, 6th, 7th grade area. I'm not really exactly sure.
Gotcha.
Somewhere in there.
So here's the question I have for you, because it was right around that same time for me. So I find this intriguing in the concept of what is it about for you growing up about the microphone that had such a draw and appeal?
That is a really good question, and I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I should think about that because that's a good question.
Right. See, so I've been a mobile DJ for 16 years, and people will tell me, how is it that I couldn't do what you do, right? I couldn't stand in front of a wedding of 200 or 300 people and be able to do what you do because, I get nervous, the microphone, the stage fright, da-da-da-da-da-da. Or even podcasters, as you've talked about on Profitcast, people who may have a hesitation with the microphone. That never existed for me. I actually got into DJing DJing, not because of music, but because I love the microphone. Seriously, that was actually my motivation. And people ask me about that all the time, and I feel like such an outlier, and it's a strange response when people ask me. So I'm always curious on somebody who early on had a love of a microphone. What was that draw? Because it repulses so many people, or at least scares them. It scares them, right?
Well, okay, so I think the beginning draw was I'm also a musician, and I really wanted to perform on stage. And I did. I had opportunities to get on stage, and I'm one of those people, too, that just loves the spotlight. And not because it's about my glory and how awesome I am. It's not that. It's
right.
What I love to do is get in front of a lot of people and do whatever I can to make their day better, encourage them, bring them laughter, joy, whatever. And when I can hear or see an actual response from the people because of something that I've done for them in a way that's positive, I love that. It's a thrill. And so when I would get on stage and play the piano, if people liked it, you're like, I just did my mission. I love it. And I love doing this. And they wanted me to do more. So I think it was the stage thing that got me started. But I'd always been fascinated in the idea of radio because I thought I would love the opportunity to broadcast to people all over the place. And I know there, like you said, there are those that are afraid of the microphone or afraid of being on stage. And they used to, those people used to say, well, isn't it enough to just bless one person? And I said, well, yeah, absolutely. That's not the thing. It's just, I love multitudes. For me, the more, the merrier. I'm an extrovert. And so I love crowds. So that was, I don't know if that's the main reason or not, but yeah, getting behind a microphone, there was always a draw, but I don't know if that's really the reason or not, but it's kind of all encompassing.
Yeah, just a curiosity of mine, really, having had a similar internal motivation when I was of that age, probably 11 or 12 years old. I used to sit in my bedroom with a boom box back then, and that had a blank tape with a record button, and I used to fake announce NFL football games.
I used to do that with basketball games.
Yes.
Yeah.
I used to love that. So even back then, long before the idea of a DJ or before podcasts were even a thing, I was recording my own voice because I just enjoyed it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's another thing I'll bring up. I actually, and I've forgotten about this. I don't know why I've forgotten about it, but I did used to actually announce for our high school basketball games. Okay. I was able to take that dream to a reality, on a small scale. But yeah, I listened to an announcer for a sports team, for a basketball team all the time because I loved it and I was fascinated by it. So that's funny. I'm glad you said that.
No, I love that aspect about it. And it's so funny when you were doing that, you probably felt like the most important person in the building, right? Like what you were doing was absolutely critical and essential and could make or break the enjoyment of every fan in those stands, right?
Whether they cared I was there or not, yes, I thought that.
When for 98% of the people, you were probably just background noise.
Exactly. Seriously.
Yes.
Oh, I just experienced that a couple weeks ago too. So, but we'll talk about that. But it's the same kind of thing. I'm like, I am important and no one was there for me at all.
All right. So let's get on to the to Profitcast, which is the show that I've been listening to and recommending for so long. So you got this idea and this concept that you fell in love with podcasting and you figure out, I want to find a way to be able to do this more often, full time, etc. So I need to find a way to make money. So you start this show. What was sort of when you're kind of thinking about, okay, I'm about to produce episode 1, did you have any idea what episode 2 or 3 would be? Kind of what was sort of the idea of that you were trying to get in, say, the first 10 or 12 episodes?
I think to back up a little bit on that, I was asked, what's your passion? What's my passion? And I have a hard time answering that question because I've got, 20, 30, 40, 50 things that I have passions for. You brought up basketball. I love basketball. I love sci-fi. I love superheroes. I'm a nerd. I game. I do, whatever. But there's so many different passions, and I thought I could talk about 20 to 30 or whatever of these things and be very happy. I roast my own coffee. You know what I'm saying? And so in that moment, I thought I got to pick something, but I don't want to pick something. And so what it came down to is this idea that if I actually do want to do a podcast on coffee, for example, or on basketball or gaming or whatever someday, I need to learn how to make money with this because I'm one of those people that I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur ever since I can remember. Even if I worked in jobs, they didn't last well because it's not what I'm cut out for. So I knew that this was something that I would need to make money with in order to pay the bills, be responsible, and allow me to continue forward. And so that was really the driving force for Profitcast. And so the first 10 to 12 episodes, the idea was, I'm going to share my journey. I'm going to share that I'm not an expert yet, and I'm going to learn. But I'm also going to set out and I'm going to find people to interview that have succeeded in areas of podcasting that I want to learn about. So how do you grow your audience? How do you create better engagement with your listeners? How do you create raving fans, which goes back to the engagement as well? How do you make money in a way that's actually realistic and respectful? So that's kind of the initial driving force.
So just to put this into context for folks, and I know that you've mentioned this in earlier episodes of Profitcast, and probably throughout, actually, I've heard you make reference, that you're not a single guy in a basement trying to make some money. You're a family man, correct?
Married, yes.
Yes, you are married, and you are sort of one half, if you will, of the household income. So
exactly.
I just kind of want to give folks an idea that you're not just a teenager in a basement somewhere. You're married. And so folks who are in a similar position, I want them to realize kind of the full on scope of what it is that you intended to do when you launched Profitcast.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny because my wife will be the first to admit that being married to an entrepreneur is not an easy thing. Right. And being an entrepreneur is not an easy thing. It's who I am, and it's extremely rewarding. Here's the beauty of being an entrepreneur. It's a beauty and a curse. You can make unlimited money and do whatever you want, and you can make no money and do what you hate. You know what I mean? Because it's all on you. And so, a lot of people want to quit their jobs and become an entrepreneur because it looks glamorous. And I will say that it can be, but I will also say that it is infinitely harder than working for somebody. But it's more rewarding, in my opinion, if you're cut out for it. So with that comes, yes, the responsibility of being a husband. Like you said, one half the income and one half the household. My wife does have a great job that she absolutely loves. It's her passion, and it's great. But at the same time, our town does seem to get more and more expensive because, they're turning it into a high-end city, which is great. I mean, it's wonderful. But for those of us that live here, you got to continue to make more money if you want to stay.
Right.
And it's not just inflation. Like there's a lot of stuff, right? And so there, just kind of as a joke here, I did hear somebody say once, make $1,000, a month with your podcast, and you can pay all your bills. And I went, where do you live? Like $1,000 a month here isn't even going to cover rent.
That's the guy in the parents' basement, I think.
Yeah. It's funny.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I do recognize the responsibilities that, depending on where you live in the country or the world for that matter, there are areas that require you to make thousands of dollars a month in order just to pay your bills, feed your family, whatever. It's not cheap in certain areas. And then there are areas that it is. So it just depends. So I kind of came at this whole idea with that, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a businessman. I want to make some money. I've had some successful businesses in the past. As an entrepreneur, you try a lot and you fail a lot in order to find the right thing. And from my radio days, I was transitioning out of radio where I was getting paid. I was working for TV Talk where I was getting paid. And all that money went away because the companies went away.
Right.
And I was stuck at a point where I went, I'm not making any money. This is really bad. I mean, we had saved up. We had money we could live on for a while, but that runs out. And so, in that moment, I'm thinking, I've got to create a business. And I don't really know how to do this right now because I want to make money through podcasting. But I had heard the success stories and I thought, that's easy. Yeah.
Right.
And then I got into it and realized this is a lot harder than you think. I had also heard the success stories from people who had started podcasts years ago. And I'm looking at people starting podcasts, a year and a half ago and even up to today and realizing the game's changed. There's a lot of noise now. You don't just start a podcast and have automatic success anymore. You really have to work hard at it. It's a lot of work now. And so going through that, I thought, I've got to make money. I've got to figure this out. So that, one is I'm paying our bills, and at the same time, I'm respecting my wife too. And so that was kind of there's that side of it, I guess. I mean, there's more to it, but
right.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was really interesting to me, and one of the reasons I think I immediately caught on to Profitcast and stuck with it the whole time, was that you sort of launched the show with this concept that this is what I want to do. I have a feeling a lot of you out there want to do something similar. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to do this. I've got some ideas, but we're going to talk to some people and hopefully together we'll get there. And that concept was what was sort of the hook for me, because our show started not the same time, similar-ish window, mid-2014, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
When was the episode 1 of Profitcast?
July.
July
It was
2014.
like July 1st, basically.
Yeah, I launched in September 1st. And so it was finding this young show that was like, I don't know all the answers, but I'm going to try. And I have this constant belief, and it sounds like you probably feel exactly the same way, that if you're passionate about something, kind of like what we were talking about with sports announcing, you do that because you watch a lot of sports and you're picking up things, and because you're passionate and interested in something, you want to soak up everything you can to make yourself better at that thing. Mm-hmm. So that's why I started listening to School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson, to Profitcast with yourself, and so on and so forth. And I did a little segment as well with Cliff Ravenscraft, although pretty much you and Dave have kind of been my stalwarts all along. But so that road is the reason I kind of found it in the first place, was I felt like it was an investment in myself. And through this road, through this arc of, as we sit here and record today, Profitcast is 74 episodes old, I believe, as we sit here today.
Yeah.
You've
75 this upcoming week.
75 coming out soon. You've had a lot of ups and downs.
Oh, yeah.
And you've shared pretty much all of it.
Which was a risk.
Right. Which was what I think. Now, one, talk to folks about your choice of being that transparent in this process.
I'm a real guy. I like to be honest with people as much as I feel is going to benefit them, if that makes sense. I don't feel like some people tend to share too much. Like it doesn't benefit me for somebody to share something I didn't need to hear, kind of thing.
Right.
And so I'm extremely honest with people as much as it benefits them. And that's kind of been my hope. And so with that, I wanted to be as authentic and transparent as possible when it came to podcasting, because I was taught, you need to become an expert and blah, 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 become an expert, teach all these people, do your thing. And I thought, well, that's all great and all, except that I'm not an expert. So I need to figure this out, and I need to but I need to get started. And I was talking with Jeremy and Jason from Internet Business Mastery about this. And they had said that actually there are a couple people out there who are basically, they're saying they're not the experts. They're just sharing the journey, and we're following them, on their journey and learning from them as they learn. And I thought, well, why would anybody care about that? And they said, interestingly enough, people want that because they don't necessarily want to feel like they're 10 steps apart from the expert that's talking at them. They want to journey along with somebody who's right there with them. And I thought that's a really fascinating concept, and it makes perfect sense. And so that's kind of where the whole idea was like, okay, I'm just going to start Profitcast. I'm going to say, I don't know all the answers yet. There are things that I do know, and there are things I don't, and I'm going to go learn them. And so that's kind of where it started. And then it was the whole thing where I'm just going to be as honest as I can. I will tell you this, though. There were episodes that I recorded that I deleted and never aired. And that was out of, thankfully. So here's a cool thing. I have to share this, that one of my Arrow co-hosts volunteered to write my blog posts on Profitcast. It's just her being amazing as she is. But also it was an outlet for her to be able to work on her writing because she loves to write. And it has helped me out tremendously because I love speaking. I don't like to write as much. So I could record a 30-minute episode in 30 minutes, be done, and it would take me 2 to 3 hours to write the blog post. And she said, let me do that for you. So with that, she's also a very honest person. And there were episodes that I said, I'm not sure about this. If you like it, let's do the blog post and release it. And if you got reservations, let me know. And she's one that won't hold back. And she said, this is not going to help your listeners. She said, I'm glad you're being honest. It's very transparent. It's neat to hear. She goes, but this is going to discourage people. And I thought, wow. Okay. So that's where the honesty, like I said in the beginning, doesn't benefit somebody else.
And I think that just feedback from one Profitcast listener, long time Profitcast listener, that is the reason I've stuck around. And as somebody who has, as of today, 69 episodes of podcast recommendations, okay, I'm constantly flipping through a subscription list. I always have at least 100 shows I'm subscribed to, and I'm constantly keeping that number under 100 as the show continues to grow and I recommend more things. I unsubscribe to things all the time. I've not done that to your show, and there's a reason.
Wow.
Is that because we talked a little bit about some of the other podcasts about podcasts or podcasts on podcasting. And the reason that I've unsubscribed to some of those or some of them didn't appeal to me was that they were maybe too polished. They were maybe too salesy. They were maybe too focused on only money. And with Profitcast, it was one of the hooks you brought in, I don't know, episode 3, 5, 7, somewhere early, where you were like, you know what? The profit in Profitcast isn't just about money. Yeah. Because there's somebody like me, and I guarantee you a majority of people listening to the show right now have not made 1 red cent from their show. And let's be honest, the prospects of them making 1 red cent are probably pretty low because, you know, they sit in their basement, they have full-time jobs, they have, you know, but they have the passion. Oh, do they have the passion? And they have a really rabid, engaged audience, albeit maybe small. Yeah. And nothing would want them to fall off the perch. But to hear somebody that has shared the ups and downs, who isn't getting full-on sales pitchy to them all the time, and your show, by and large, doesn't come with an associated product, right? I know you did a little bit of coaching, and you would mention that occasionally, but it wasn't like you had your own personal ad breaks supporting your own product, and it was a constant pitch. Profitcast isn't like that, and I think that's why Profitcast is doing as well as it is. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know, and I'll be honest, like, I'm split on that one because you're right. Exactly what you just said there is what I think allows people to come in and feel comfortable there without me trying to sell them. On the other hand, I haven't been able to, well, up until recently, I wasn't able to pay my bills. Right. So, you know, there's I don't know, there's a little bit of a line there, but I am personally working on something. I've been working on some stuff that I'd like to do, but I don't want it to be a Profitcast product per se. And so I look at it as that I want to use Profitcast as the funnel, as, okay, we're still going to talk about this stuff. We're still going to do, you know, the real deal here. And I'm not trying to sell at you. It's just, here's what I'm doing. And by the way, if you want to learn about this, over here's a separate entity that's doing this. And I'm part of it. It's kind of like with the hosting that I'm doing right now too, where I'm not trying to sell people that listen to Profitcast that I'm a host for audiobooks and, you know, anybody else that wants for me to host their podcast. I would love to get more clients, but I'm not trying to sell to my Profitcast listeners. I'm sharing about here's what I'm doing and here's what's working and what isn't. And so I try to be very real on that standpoint. And yeah, you know what? I have actually thought about that over and over about, should I do a product or not? Because once money comes into the equation, like a direct Profitcast monetary thing, do I lose the objective credibility?
Right. Because to me, Profitcast, intended or not, and I'm almost sure it wasn't intended, what it's become to me, and I don't mean this in the dissuading sense that one may take this, because I mean this in the most positive way, it's almost become like a podcasting reality show in the sense that it is a realistic portrayal of one person trying to get to a particular point with their show and talking to all the people that they can possibly reach out to find out how to do that. And there are so many of us that want, like you, to use the terminology you've put out there, to go along on that journey. And that in and of itself, I think, creates a value to not just what you're doing today, but its whole back catalog to anyone who may find themselves in a similar situation. And had you been kicking a product the whole time, I don't know that it has that same value, but I'm just one man's opinion.
No, and I think you're right, actually. And that's something that has definitely gone across my mind quite a few times. And I was concerned about it, which is why I never did release a product. That was one of the main reasons. Yeah. And also, well, but it's some other reasons. But I will say, too, that going back to your thing about profiting beyond the money, too, that really came to mind when I interviewed Kevin Batchelder, which I think was episode 2. And I sat down with him, and he's my other co-host for Aero Squad. But he is somebody who has been podcasting for 10 years, has just a deep, deep, deep passion for podcasting, more than most podcasters I know, and has absolutely no desire to make 1 cent with podcasting because it's his passion and he loves his day job. And it was then that I realized not every podcaster wants to make money, but every podcaster I know wants to grow their audience, not just numbers, but grow, engagement, depth, relationships, all that. They want to create something that listeners will love. Every podcaster I know wants that, whether they want to make money or not. And that, to me, is profiting beyond the money. That's just one way to profit beyond the money.
Exactly. And that was such a... Hearing that, and then hearing Dave Jackson's segment that he constantly has because of my podcast, right? As my show was launching, and then hearing you talk about that concept that you just explained, as well as hearing Dave Jackson's call-in guests with stories about what has come about from their show, made me realize that while my wife and my family may say, "Oh, you started a podcast. Hey, you got ads yet? You making any money?" And I'm like, no, but there's so much more that I'm getting from this. The people I've met, the interactions I've had with strangers, the voice that I feel like I have never would have occurred had none of this ever begun. And I think making sure those people who may have in the back of their mind or maybe doing this for the money. I tell people, don't start a podcast if you want to become rich. You're in the wrong line of work if that's the thing, because odds are that's not going to be you. It's possible, sure, but odds are it's not you, and you better have more skin in the game than just the idea of filling up a bank account.
And you know what? I will say this, that it can be you, but be prepared for one heck of a lot of work and time. So let me share something with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
This was super. It goes along with what you just said, because I do ask this question. Like you said, well, are ads coming in yet? Are you making any money? And there are times where even just today, I was like, there are a lot of activities that I have a tendency to do that do not directly generate money, and they actually are meant to serve others, which is good. And I have absolutely no regret, but sometimes you do have that question, that struggle that's going, okay, I know that I'm helping out others, but what about this bill that I have to pay? Or what about this over here? You know what I'm talking about? Absolutely. That kind of struggle.
Yeah.
What I wanted to share a really neat story with Aero Squad, because, at the beginning that paid me. It was great. Then it stopped paying, and it's been a volunteer thing. And I've had many, many conversations in my own mind going, I would love to keep Aero Squad going because I love talking about my TV show Aero. I love it. It's one of my favorite TV shows of all time. My co-hosts are some of my best friends now. The listeners, the community have been phenomenal. And then there are times where I go, how do I continue to justify this? I mean, yes, it's a hobby, but it's a lot of work for a hobby, right? And it's been interesting because when I went to Dragon Con in September of this year to meet my co-hosts for the first time, meet some of our listeners and kind of engage in that community, I for the first time, really, I had learned this is why I do what I do. Because the friendships that I've built, the listener engagement that I've built, and not just me, but that we've all built, as a community. It was just like, this means so much more than money. This means more than anything, the relationships that are happening here. And that was the first taste that I had of why a podcast is so powerful, regardless of whether you're making money or not, regardless of whether people think you should be making money or not. Look at what has occurred here. And I will never forget the friendships that I've built out of this show. And then it got even cherry on top kind of thing. I got invited to speak at the first Heroes and Villains Fan Fest, which happened 2 weeks ago in San Jose. And basically it was Stephen Amell, who plays the Green Arrow, Oliver Queen on Arrow. It was his idea to say the Walking Dead conventions, the Walker Stalker cons are so popular. They're so great. Let's do something for superheroes. And that whole team came together and did the first one. And a friend of mine who's actually part of the team, Jason Kabassi, said, hey man, you want to come and moderate some of the panels, interview the actors? And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. Like, really? I've always wanted to do that. And he said, yeah, you're good enough. Come up and do this. So I got a chance to interview some of my favorite actors on stage. And I thought I would have never been up here doing this if I hadn't kept going with Aero Squad, if I hadn't built relationships without expecting anything out of them, like actual genuine relationships, if I hadn't worked on my skills as a podcaster and interviewing people and stuff, I wouldn't have been up here. And then to top it all off, there were two moments that I read 3 different articles about the Fan Fest, and all 3 articles shared 2 of the moments that were very memorable to them. And it was a story that Stephen and Robbie Amell shared in the panel that I moderated. because I had asked a question to get them to talk about something that none of us have heard before. And it was one of those hilarious stories that people just gravitated to and were talking about and buzzing about. And then another panel that I got a chance to talk with David Ramsey. And there was this fan that got in line, and she got up to the microphone and she could barely talk. She was so excited. She was literally buckling at the knees because she couldn't hold herself up because she was so excited. And I leaned over to David off mic and I'm like, dude, you want to invite her up to have her come sit with us? And he's like, yeah, that's a great idea. And so, he gets on the mic because I wanted him to get the credit. And he's like, hey, you want to come up here and sit with us? I mean, we made this girl's life.
Exactly.
It was amazing. And that went viral, that whole story. Like, David Ramsey, the coolest guy ever, blah, blah, blah. And I thought, oh, man, I got a chance to be a part of this. And none of this would have happened if I would have given up or if I would have thought, oh, I'm not making any money. It's whatever.
I am constantly amazed at the memories and the stories that can come from a microphone.
I know.
It's amazing. And be it on your podcast, be it on something that had come from the podcast, be it on other experiences. I think back to my past as a mobile DJ. One time I got to introduce a band on stage in front of a smaller concert venue, but it was a sold out show, and there was 1,000 people on 2 floors up and down, and I was introducing on a band on center stage prior to, in a concert venue where I'd seen 10 other shows.
Yeah.
And awesome. I still tell that story as I just did, and I will never forget that, and that is because of a microphone.
Yeah.
And for anyone who may not think that they have prospects of a financial windfall from their podcast, it can and often does lead to other things that, if nothing else, will be stories that you'll be telling for years.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, and people you've impacted, whether they know it or, whether you know it or not, or whether they know it or not too. I think, there's so much of impact that we have behind a microphone. And I would honestly say that we probably don't know 95 to 99% of what happens.
That's true. Unless they tell you directly. I had one, and it's funny. I had somebody say to me on Twitter just a couple of days ago, and if I knew this was coming up, I'd have this gentleman's name ready, because I'm scrolling through my mentions right now to see if I could find it, because I would really love to call this out. This guy, I literally read this off to my wife, and I was like, can you believe this? He said to me, he's like, something to the effect of, I thought I had it here for a second, but I absolutely loved your interview with so-and-so. It was great, and I am binge listening through your back catalog while decorating the Christmas tree.
Nice.
And I said to my wife, I was like, are you kidding me? There's somebody out right now putting up their tree, and they are listening to me and my show this whole time, and I'm thinking, that is amazing. That is so cool.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I was and she was like, that's great, honey. Okay, thanks. Well,
No, it's really cool. It really is.
That's what I was trying to tell her.
Okay, so I got to say something to that too.
Yeah.
My wife, has heard all the stories too, and I've shared them. I don't think she really understood them 100% until she was sitting in the audience at Heroes and Villains Fan Fest, watching me on stage with the actors and seeing the response firsthand.
Then it became real.
I think at that moment she was just like, oh, now I get it. I didn't understand this, but I mean, I heard it, but I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
So just FYI.
No, I completely understand it. Maybe I need to try to get her out to some type of live event. Maybe she'll.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Yeah.
Let's create our own.
So we've talked a lot about Profitcast. We've talked about the up and down. And folks, I'm going to mention this many times. If you are a podcaster and you want to learn more about doing this and hear from somebody who's kind of had that up and down struggle, if you will, go back. The links are in the show notes. As always, folks, subscribe. And I would suggest, of course, start with Brian's most recent stuff is excellent, but there is value, I think, in going back and kind of following this along. Put it into every other subscription you've got, every other episode. Just throw a new Profitcast in there. Go along in order. I think you'll really find this an interesting process, because I mentioned earlier, Brian, you had some up and downs, and I want to cover just one down before we talk about what's kind of happened with you in the last couple of months, because this story ends on a much more positive note. But you had an infamous episode of Profitcast that I think set the internet on fire, and I'll be one of them. In fact, I remember right where I was, Brian. I was walking through a Target shopping with my earbuds when that episode came up on my playlist, and I was like, last episode of Profitcast, what? Tell folks a little bit about what happened there.
Oh my gosh. See, and it takes things like that to go viral. Okay. No, I'm kidding. It's true. Everyone blame me for clickbaiting. I'm like, no, but it was what was going through my mind. That's why I said that. That was a really interesting episode. That episode was, I would say, let's say a couple months in the making, because I was coming up on, I guess it was about a year of Profitcast when I released it. It was right about July-ish of 2015. So about a year of Profitcast. And prior to that, I was really struggling trying to make money. I mean, really, I was getting to the point where I think at one point in my business checking account, there was $47 left. And I'm like, this sucks. Like, I got to do something.
Right.
And I remember having a conversation with my wife, and I said, I have put my soul into this podcast, my blood, sweat, and tears. And I'm not making a dime from this. And I don't know how to make money from this. I tried coaching. I'm not great at coaching in the way that I think a lot of people want it. Like they want somebody to hold their hand and tell them step by step, structure on how to do this. And that's just not my style. Plus, I was running into the problem where I know how important performance is, storytelling is, and interview skills are. And I was trying to express that. And I was getting a lot of, yeah, whatever. That's just fluff from a lot of people. And I thought, but you know what? Every successful podcast out there, every successful talk show host, everyone you can imagine that is hitting it big knows how to perform, knows how to tell stories, and knows how to interview, period. And if you can't do those things, you're not going to get there. But people didn't want it. And it was really weird. So I kind of stepped back and I said, well, what do I have to offer then? Because that's what I know. I know those things. I don't know how to teach marketing strategies. I don't know, how to teach. I don't want to teach people how to start a podcast because that's already been done. I want to teach more of the advanced level stuff, or at least not necessarily teach, but you know what I mean? Encourage people that way. And I wanted to perform. And I went to New Media Expo and I was given the advice, find people who have done what you've done and ask them how to get there. And so that's what I did with Profitcast. That's why I interviewed people. And I started interviewing people on the show and also off the show, people that had mastered performance and were doing really, really well with their podcasts, getting paid basically to perform. And every one of them, I asked them, what's the secret? Like, how did you do this? How do I do this? And they all said, well, I just built relationships. And I said, I know how important building relationship is. And I do that constantly. And I said, but that doesn't always equal your level of success. Like there's got to be something more there. And I realized that none of them really knew the answer, which was shocking, almost like they'd lucked into it. And that really discouraged me. And I came out of New Media Expo feeling horrible, feeling discouraged. In fact, one person, and I think you heard this too, one person that I really used to look up to, a podcasting mentor, let's call that person that, told me, why don't you just quit Profitcast? Like, why would anyone want to listen to you? Why would I listen to you? Because let's face it, you don't know the answers. That's pretty much what this person told me.
Right.
And I went, And that's kind of what got me started down that path of maybe I should just quit this whole thing.
So what happened when that episode got released?
So right up into that episode, I said, you know what? I'm wondering if I should quit or not. I talked to a bunch of people about this. A lot of them actually, finally, that's when people finally stepped in, that I was, again, this was off air, talking to people like, is this real? Like, do I really not know what I'm talking about and stuff? And it was people like Dave Jackson and some of those other people like that were like, dude, don't listen to that guy. Like, just don't. That's not true. You actually do have something good here. And actually it was, one of the encouraging people was when I got an email from John Lee Dumas, who had said, hey, I just found your podcast and I've been binge listening to it. And I thought, wait, John Lee Dumas is listening to my show?
Right.
Like, why? And he goes, oh my gosh, like, I love what you do. I love your performance. I love all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And he just started really listening off all these compliments. And he did a shout out to me at one of the online podcasting conferences that I was a part of in January of last year. Or no, I'm sorry, it was this year. That's funny. That was recent. Anyway, so he kind of told me all that stuff and he kept sending me these emails of encouragement over time. And I thought, I don't get this. Like, I've got one guy here telling me that I should shut this whole thing down, and another guy over here telling me that I should keep this thing going. And so I went into this, let's call it it was not a fun journey. It was about, like I said, a 2-month journey where I was debating back and forth whether or not I should do this. I'm not making money. What am I going to do? I want to get paid to perform. I don't know how to do it. And finally, I just said, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to figure this out. I don't care what it takes. I don't care if it's crazy. I'm going to figure out how to get paid to perform, how to really achieve the goals that I want to go after on this one. I don't care what anybody says. And that's when I finally agreed with my wife, let's keep this thing going. Not a good idea to quit right now. And she kept telling me this over and over. Something great is just around the corner. You're almost there. Like if you give up now, it's over. But if you keep going, I have this feeling it's just going to happen. Like it's really soon. I thought, okay, we're going to do this.
But did you get just diluted with feedback after that episode?
Yeah. So that's when I released the episode saying this is what was going through my mind. And I literally was going to make this episode the last episode of Profitcast, but thankfully I'm not.
Right.
And yeah, I got so much feedback. People going, holy crap, what do you think you're doing? Like if you quit, I'm going to come after you kind of thing,
coming out of the woodwork, folks.
Yeah.
All of a sudden.
I thought, what, I've been asking for this feedback for a year. Where have you guys been?
Yeah.
And it took that level of intensity, I think, to get people to go, whoa, hold on. I didn't even know probably 90% of those people even listen to the show until that episode.
Well, I want to talk about the good things that have happened, and
yes.
I know I keep alluding to that, but one more thing before I leave Profitcast proper, if you will, and that is just a few comments, if you would, Brian, on the production. You've got a really clean, awesome sound in your production, and somebody who's now going to subscribe to Profitcast, because I told them to, right, folks? You're doing it right now. Show notes, subscribe. Immediately is going to hear some awesome production quality. Tell folks a little bit about the hardware, software you use. Obviously, you've learned a lot being behind the microphone for a lot of years. Any best tips for folks on that?
Oh my gosh, there's a lot to that, so I'll give you a really quick, feedback on that. But I will say this: it was a work in progress. It was a lot of learning, like you said. There were mic techniques that I've learned over the years, getting the right hardware, which takes time, and also not every mic is made equal. Like I use a Heil PR40.
That's what I was going to ask. What mic are you on?
Yeah, and I love it. But you know what? It doesn't always sound great with everybody.
That's true.
So I look at that. The Heil is not necessarily the best mic, but it's the best mic for me.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of hardware I've put together, based on as the money came in, I put it together. I also had a friend of mine, colleague of mine, who's an audio engineer and helped me to put this together correctly because he knows exactly what he's doing. And he taught me how to do it. But with that also comes learning how to use it, how to make sure that, when I do interviews, I'm equalizing the person's voice and I'm making sure that, they sound just right coming through things. So yeah, there's a lot of, it's not just the equipment, it's how you use it. It's not just the microphone, it's how you speak into it. There's so much that goes into it. But quick tips, get a good microphone, period. Find one that fits your voice. Learn how to use it. Learn how to perform. Learn how to present yourself. That's so important. I love the compressor limiter gate that I use. I use the Behringer MDX 4600. I know that there's a DBX one out there that's great too. That has been an amazing life change because it drops out. Basically, it eliminates basically noise under a certain decibel. So if you've got a hiss going on, or if you've got some background room noise or a fan or whatever, breathing, how people go like
right
into the mic, stuff like that. It eliminates a lot of that. So it keeps a lot cleaner of a sound. Love that thing. Wonderful for Skype interviews as well because it drops out whatever junk noise that someone else might have too. And a pop filter is huge. That was a big change for me. I do use a mixer. I use external sound cards on my computers so that I can control more channels. Like I have one channel for Skype, and I don't run my computer sound through that same channel on purpose. Stuff like that. So there's little things, there's little tweaks that you can do, that really help. But it really depends on what you need. A studio like this, I would only recommend to somebody who's getting serious about podcasting and is actually going to do this for the long haul because it's not cheap.
And do you do all the editing yourself?
I do.
What do you edit in?
I use Audacity. I love it.
I just saw. Did you see there was? And people, it's gonna be a few days late from folks. They just put a sale on the subscription. I think for today only. We're recording here on December 2nd. At 1 day sale, and boy, I almost pulled the trigger on Audition.
Oh no, Audacity.
Right, because Oh, Audacity, not the Adobe subscription. Oh, because I'm in Audacity.
I love Audacity because it's free. It's open source. It's powerful. If you know how to use it, you don't need Audition.
Yeah, I was thinking of Audition.
Everyone's like, oh, Audition's better. Yeah, it is. But you don't necessarily need it. I've never used Audition.
You like Audacity?
I do. Well, here's the thing. So I learned how to use Audacity kind of by myself. I've been audio editing since computers could audio edit. Let's put it that way. So I love this stuff. But I actually had help from my friend Daryl Darnell, who is over at Golden Spiral Media. He does Pro Podcast Solutions. He was actually the lead producer over at TV Talk, and he taught us a bunch of tricks on Audacity that I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know how to do that. And that has made my sound amazing. And I use 3 filters that create like the noise removal and compressors,
right,
and the peak limiters so that you can get, just the right sound. It comes across how I like it anyway. Not everybody likes my sound.
Really?
Well, so I'm going to pick on him because I love this guy, Daniel J. Lewis, who I consider to be a true audiophile. He has a different way of doing it, and it sounds phenomenal. And he loves his way and doesn't like my way as much. It's not to say that either of our ways are wrong. It's just that his is more of a purist form. But I prefer more the way I do it. But that's just me.
Well, I every one of my episodes has been put out through edited on Audacity, and maybe I need to start digging a little deeper if that's what you're using at this point, because I'm a big fan of the sound quality coming out, and I imagine most folks who have now subscribed to Profitcast is going to be a fan as well. So
let me ask you this, Dan. Would it help you? And I've been honestly debating this just because the work that would go into it. But would it help you or anyone that you know for me to put out some kind of a studio tutorial, like here's what I have and here's how I use it?
I think so, right? I mean, I have assembled over time a few tips and tricks. I've got a little link on my website, and all they are is associated collected links from various different people, and I think there's some there from Dave Jackson and others, Ray Ortega, different videos that he's put together. He did a video on Mix Minus with Skype and a mixer, and that's linked on my website. And those type of things have been invaluable. I know that I've shared them with a lot of the other independent podcaster community that I'm kind of growing up with, and they have found that an invaluable resource. So, yeah, I think anything that's out there that you would be willing to share, I think people would find invaluable.
Okay.
For sure.
I'll keep that in mind.
Well, I've been alluding to it for a while. So we've talked a lot about Profitcast, and we've talked a lot about this journey in those episodes. But recently, you have been branching out and starting to achieve parts of your goal. Tell folks what have been happening over the last couple months.
I had an opportunity. Well, here, I'll share kind of the background of this one. But obviously, as you know, as I said already, building the relationship with John Lee Dumas, which I never wanted to take advantage of that relationship or friendship. I know that he had extraordinary influence. He obviously shares his income reports. I never wanted to take advantage of that. So I was just like, man, thank you. Let me know how I can help. Like I left it at that. And then I did an episode a while ago about sponsorships. Are they really worth it? And I had done a bunch of research, contacted a bunch of different companies asking what their sponsorship requirements were for podcasts, what they were looking for, that kind of thing. Which, by the way, if you're interested in sponsorships, that episode was a very shocking discovery for me.
Right.
When I hear companies saying they want to see between 20 and 80,000 listeners per episode minimum, right, I thought you guys are smoking crack. That's all I had to say.
Exactly.
But that's what they think. Anyway, so listen to that episode if you want some more info on that. I've got some thoughts on that too. But one of those companies that I had established a relationship with over time, and he was part of my research, was audiobooks.com. And I love that company too. It was really cool. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, because I had been, and as I said earlier, I'd been saying, how do I get paid to perform? And somebody came to me a long time ago and said, why don't you host podcasts for someone else? And I thought, well, great idea, but how? And then I interviewed Jason Bryant on Profitcast.
He's the one with the wrestling shows.
Yep. He hosts podcasts for colleges about wrestling. And he said, you should do that. And I thought, but you're an expert in wrestling. I'm not. I don't even know what topic would I do. And I was having a conversation with another friend quite a bit later who said, you don't need to be an, I'm sorry, this was my PT, my physical therapist I was having, because we were having a conversation about podcasting. And he said, well, why do you need to be an expert? Why can't you just interview experts in that field? Because he was even talking about doing a podcast for physical therapy, and I'm not an expert. But, he said, well, do you have an interest in it? And I said, well, yeah, I blew my disc out and I got hit by a car on my bike. I obviously have an interest so that I can learn how to, be strong again. And he said, well, you've got a passion for it. Why don't you interview people in that industry who can be experts because others can't host like you do? And I thought, actually, that's a good point. And as he said that, I got 6 phone calls from individual people who didn't know each other, didn't talk to each other. They're all podcasters who randomly came to me and said, I have this idea. You should host podcasts for someone else. And I said, okay, if that's not a clear sign, I don't know what is.
Right.
And the next day I get an email from Nick over at Audiobooks saying, can we pick your brain about how to start a podcast? And I said, okay, yeah, that's fine. I was afraid it was going to be kind of a, they're going to take me for my for my knowledge. We get on the call, I tell him all about it. And then at the end, he goes, well, here's the thing. We don't want to host it. Do you know of anyone that would want to? And I'm like, no way. And I said, I will do it. Absolutely.
What a week.
Oh my gosh. Like, it was incredible. And so that's when I said, let's make this happen. And it worked out. And that started. And right after that, it's like I got the courage to approach John Lee Dumas because the idea had come up basically about doing a show for Podcasters Paradise, interviewing Paradisers who, like, let's hear about their stories, whether they're successful or not yet. Like, let's hear about where they're at. And I approached John and I said, dude, good news. Look at this, audiobooks. It's exciting, And I said, and I got an idea for you. What do you think? And I was like, he's not going to respond to this. It's John. He's got whatever he needs. And he wrote back and he said, I love your idea. Let's talk. What? No way. So that whole thing came about too. And right at the same time, it was audiobooks and it was the Podcasters Paradise podcasts getting paid to host these shows for them, host and produce them. Wow. So that's what happened.
And it's so ironic because I mentioned it, I'm sorry, the name eludes me, but the gentleman who hosts the shows for colleges for their wrestling programs, this was months and months and months ago you interviewed him.
Oh, yeah.
And the irony that all this time later, his sort of formula was one that ultimately ended up working for you.
And that is funny because he is the original, at least that I know of. He's not the first to do it, right? But he was the original person that I talked to that was doing this. And I think what was the sticker in my mind is that I only believed that you could do it if you were an expert in a topic.
Right.
And I had realized that I was just not an expert in any of these topics, and it held me back. Not because I was afraid, but because I'm like, I have nothing to offer these people because I'm not really like, okay, well, I could talk about roasting coffee, but I'm not an expert compared to some of those people. And so that's why I never pursued it.
And now Profitcast has a whole nother dimension to it because now you're bringing in a lot of your experience with hosting these other shows and you're able to sort of share insight from that experience. And it's becoming just this whole other animal. Like, again, sort of going back to what I was saying before, that it's kind of almost like this reality show based journey where now you're talking about things completely differently than you were 8 months ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting. And it's kind of cool coming at it from a profitable success standpoint. But going back to what you said, even that Dave Jackson said is it's as a result of Profitcast. It's not a direct monetization of Profitcast. So that is a fascinating thing. Although I will say I still haven't mastered it yet. I'm not rolling in dough or anything. I mean, I'm paying my bills finally, and things are good. But there's always that thing in the back of my mind saying, okay, well, how do I get other clients?
Right.
I had built relationships with these 2 clients. And when I go and cold call somebody, it's not so successful because they don't know who I am, which makes sense. And then there's always the thing of, well, Brian, you're trading dollars for hours. Yep. So if I don't work, I don't get paid. Then there's the whole passive income model that people are always trying to push. So it's like, all right, how do I implement that? So there's still a lot of journey and discovery and exploration that I'm doing right now that hopefully is still coming across on Profitcast because I am saying, hey, I'm satisfied where I'm at. I'm content. I'm feeling like I am successful, even though I may not be making nearly as much money as the rest of you. I don't know. But I'm happy with where I'm at. But I'm always looking at ways to continue to grow, to continue to do more without being discontent.
Well, I'll tell you, after all that started breaking a couple months ago with what you were doing, that immediately light bulbs started going off in my head. Now, nothing's happened with me, but I did approach the DJ company I work for here on the outside suburbs of Philadelphia, and I talked to the owner, and I said, hey, maybe we should start a podcast about DJing. Then potential wedding clients, we could refer to particular podcast episodes. I'll be happy to host it. Nothing's happened, but it was an idea that's put out there. And I'm even considering approaching my day job with a similar context as well, because who else in the company has this type of background, And so, and that was all spurned on just based on sort of what you've put out there, sharing what you've sort of achieved to this point.
Yeah.
You may not be a multimillionaire, but you've made real progress at this point.
Yeah.
So.
And you know what? And again, to go along with the real thing, like there are companies that and entrepreneurs that we've approached that I firmly believe our idea was awesome. Like this is what we could do for you, and this is how it would help you. And they won't even respond to us. And it's just like, okay, what are we doing wrong? Like our idea's bad. And we got to thinking that no, the ideas are actually pretty good. The problem is they don't know who we are, and we have no reputation and testimonial base yet. I mean, it's growing. It's starting to happen. Right. But I do think there is something to be said about having a name for yourself, having that testimonial base, when you're trying to build a business. I mean, even I approached Tesla, the car company, and they were actually one of the only companies that got back to me and said, like, thanks for getting in touch with us. This is exciting. What's your idea? And I shared the idea, and they were like, this is a great idea. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources right now. Come back to us in a couple months. And I don't know if they're going to say yes or not, but I thought, with what I could do with this podcast, I'm pretty sure I could get a few listeners to buy a couple of Teslas, and they would more than pay for this podcast and make money. So I thought this is going to be a benefit to you.
And this concept is getting even more and more light shown upon it at this point. You've got Gimlet Media, who on a recent episode of Startup, I'm not sure if you're a Startup listener, but they've started talking about a branded content division that Gimlet may or may not be launching, and they were working with Zillow, potentially for something like that. And they are pointing to other shows that are doing something similar. GE with The Message that is out there right now. They are sort of getting into the podcast sponsorship game. And I've actually recommended other shows that do it. Basecamp with The Distance, which is I had a wonderful opportunity to talk to Waylon Wong a few episodes back. Basecamp basically is sponsored. Waylon is an employee of Basecamp, and her only job at the company is to produce The Distance, and that's an amazing concept to me that there's these kind of new age companies, technology companies. Tesla is a great example, I would imagine, where they are bringing on staff, if you will, or contractually getting involved with people to produce this medium as an outreach to potential clients.
And that's the goal. I think right now the problem is that people don't know the power of it yet.
Right.
And I again too, they want to know who you are. Like, why are we going to pay you any money? We don't even know who you are yet. Exactly. But I think the concept for a company having a podcast is kind of a no-brainer at this point now. Like, I think companies know it.
Yeah.
They've seen the power of podcasting. They need it.
Thank you, Serial.
Yeah, I'm serious about that.
Yeah.
But the problem that companies are running into, and this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, is that companies get in and they go, we know we need a podcast. We know why we need it. We're going to go buy all the equipment. We're going to spend all this money. And then here's what's going to happen. Well, none of us are really, good behind the mic because, frankly, we don't know how to talk behind the mic. Yep. 2, okay, well, I can coach you behind the mic, but this isn't going to be something you're going to get in a month. This is going to take years. Right. It takes a while to learn how to become a good presenter behind the microphone. And they're going to be like, oh, I don't really have time for that. And then they're going to realize, oh my gosh, podcasting's a lot of work. And if I want to do a weekly episode, I got to put in hours, and we don't have that kind of time because we're running a company. And they pod fade every time.
Yeah.
And now, not every time. I take that back. Most of the time.
Yeah, very often.
And so I've come in and said, I got a solution for you. Let me do it. You've got the business. You run the business. We have the idea here. You're still in charge of your company, but let me take care of the actual talent and production side of things so that you don't have to worry about it. And some of them get it, and some of them just haven't wrapped their head around it yet. But I think it's a phenomenal idea. And it's not just something that I can do. It's something any of us can do if we're at that point.
Yeah, it's super interesting and a super new intriguing angle to those who may want to, as you've had this itch for all along, to make this sort of their primary breadwinning. Not necessarily to become a millionaire, but to be able to at least do the work which they are so passionate about. And
absolutely,
it'll be really interesting to watch. But before we wrap up, Brian, I do want to just cover one last topic, because people are going to be looking at this, and anybody who's jumping over to this show, which again, folks, link in the show notes, subscribe to Profitcast, are going to ask the question, and I've always wondered myself, so I imagine some other folks may as well. You go by on the show, on Twitter, everywhere as The Real Brian.
Yeah.
Just sort of the backstory behind that, because it's unique.
Well, that's good. That was actually one of the main reasons. I've always had radio names. I don't like going by my real name. I never have. It's boring. It's kind of like whatever. And there was a time where I had to go by my real name at a radio station, and nobody remembered who I was. And I'm like, this is lame. I want to have a radio name, Wolfman Jack, or all the cool people out there that had radio names, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I'm also a gamer, and we do arrows, so it's like the superhero names, and so I used to go by, well, I still do with Arrow Squad, the Shadow, because that's one of my original favorite superheroes. And I would go by the Shadow, and I thought, if I'm going to be doing more of a professional, in quotes here, professional podcast, I probably should not go by the Shadow. Probably not going to be taken seriously. But I'm like, but I don't want to go by my real name, because that's boring. I want to brand myself into something that people will remember. And that's kind of where the whole Real Brian came about. It is my first real name. So I was like, I don't want to like change my name and be totally fake. And I know a lot of celebrities and people and radio people, all that, they don't go by their real names. In fact, most of them don't.
Right.
So I decided, well, it's something like The Real Brian. That'll be a lot of fun. So the main reason is for branding purposes, and the fact that, like you said, it's unique and it's memorable. And that's powerful, because, you want to stand out, right? So that's one thing. The other thing, and this was fascinating to me, I heard a story a while ago when I was just starting to get into podcasting that really scared me, because, well, we podcast. People hear us all over the world, and your name gets out there, and information about you, blah blah blah. There was a couple. This was the story. There was a couple that podcasted. This was years ago, and they had a great podcast, and they shared their name and all their personal information, because gosh darn it, podcasting is supposed to be transparent. And they're like, hey, we finally have scraped enough money together to go on a vacation for the first time in 7 years, and we're going on a vacation, so there won't be an episode next week, and everyone's cheering for them. They went on their vacation, they come back, their house was robbed.
Right.
Because they shared too much, and people knew that they were gone.
Right. And
they went and literally took everything from them. And I just went, that scared me. I got to be honest. And I'm like, you know what? I am married. I have a wife. I want her protected. So part of me is that, it's a branding thing. It's a fun thing. It's a radio thing. And on the other hand, there's things I think that as a husband, we got to protect.
Safety and anonymity.
In some ways, like, I don't want it to ever be a fake thing. Like, I want people to know who I am, and I'm not going to lie to people and stuff like that. If somebody asks me a question, I'm going to be truthful, whatever. But I think that there's just certain things, and that's kind of what I was saying in the beginning of the show. There are certain things you share for the benefit of the listener. But there are things, you got to protect your family. You got to take care of those, take care of your own, right?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense to me. In fact, it almost makes me wish going back in time to episode 1 if I'd have thought of something similar. But, maybe somebody who is listening to this show may at least have that thought run through their head if they are considering launching a show, and it might be something worth considering. And I appreciate you sharing, because it was something I hadn't heard you discuss before, and imagine folks may have that question. So
sure. Yeah. And, people have asked, and I've never really talked about it. I just never thought about it, but I just got to thinking, people... Yeah, if I'm doing business with them, they know my real name. It's not a big deal or anything like
contracts
that.
And things,
of
course, right.
It's just more for fun and for protection, I think. But
completely understandable.
Yeah. Well, let me throw that out too.
Yeah. Something,
if you have a mailing list, this was actually recommended to me. Speaking of protection, like if you're thinking, I've got a mailing list, get a PO box. Go to a UPS office near you, or whatever you have. Get a PO box and make that your mailing address. Because if you've got an email list, you have to put a mailing address on it. in order to be legal. And so having a PO box or some kind of a business address is another way of, again, it's a legit address. You actually have a box there.
Right.
But it's also just a way to protect, again, your family or whoever, from your home.
That makes sense.
You don't want people just showing up.
No, definitely don't want anybody showing up. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that one. Well, Brian, this has been absolutely phenomenal. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me. Before we go, though, please, one more time, as they will see in the show notes, but tell everybody where they can find Profitcast, audiobooks, Arrow, everything that you're doing.
ProfitcastUniverse.com is for Profitcast, and eventually I'm going to link everything on there. I just haven't done that yet. ArrowSquad.com is for our Arrow show. If you like the TV show Arrow, come over and join us. It's a lot of fun. We get pretty crazy. Audiobooks.com is our podcast for audiobooks. And then podcastersparadise.com I also interview podcasters over there. A little bit different on that show than I do with Profitcast. So still some great stuff, great tips, great encouragement too if you're a podcaster looking for information.
Awesome. And all of those will be linked up in the show notes, folks, as I keep saying, because I want you to check them out and I want you to see all the great work that Brian's doing. Brian, one more time, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Dan, thank you. I really appreciate it too.
Folks, that'll do it for episode 69 of the Podcast Digest. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, let me know. I appreciate any feedback that you have to offer. And let Brian know what you think of his journey over there on Profitcast. I'm sure he would love to hear from you as well. Folks, that'll do it. My name's Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest, and I'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter at PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.